Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. So I went to go back. It was at 6:20 or 16:20. I accidentally went to start it and clicked and brought the thing way up over here, so had to jostle it a little bit. Anyways, this is part 2. American Revolution, Battle of Saratoga, 1777. There's about to be a nice battle between Gates and Burgoyne, it sounds like. Real quick, subscribe and thumbs up, completely free. If you could click on those, that helps me out tremendously. You can donate to the channel through the thanks button, request a video, your name sponsors that video. Okay. Now with the nonsense out of the way, let's get to it.
Two forces are now on a collision course at Saratoga. On September 13th, Burgoyne crosses to the west side of the Hudson River with 1 month's supply of food. This cuts his line of retreat and communication north, but it does mean he can now concentrate his army without having to garrison a chain of potentially vulnerable outposts. Without their Indian allies, the British lack intelligence to the exact size and disposition of the Continentals, but Burgoyne does know that the Americans are dug in along the Bemis Heights. He plans to fix Gates in position and then outflank him from the west to force an American withdrawal or crush them against the river. General Gates orders Benedict Arnold, now his second in command, to take the left flank of the Continental Army. But both men's prickly temperaments have been causing tensions. Arnold argues for probing attacks against the British, while Gates wants a more passive defense. On the 19th, Burgoyne's army advances in 3 columns, with remaining Indians and Loyalists acting as scouts. The columns advance at the same time and are planned to be mutually supportive. Arnold recognizes the threat posed by the high ground to the west, virtually unoccupied by the Continentals, which could be used to bombard and outflank their defenses on the heights. After several hours, Gates finally relents to Arnold's requests to move forward and meet the advancing British.
I think it was he relented because it was continuous. We need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And I'm not going to say that Arnold was wrong. The only thing was, when Arnold got it into his head, you were the wall, and he just kept hitting you and hitting you and hitting you. And eventually you're like, oh, fine, just go. Go die over there. He just enraged you. But he was a smart guy when it came to military tactics. Self-taught. So, I mean, he read a lot and stuff like that and got into it. But you got to give him some credit outside of what he ultimately did.
Colonel Morgan's riflemen lead the way, followed by close to 3,000 men under Arnold's command. The two armies meet at Freeman's Farm, which encompasses large fields and clearings surrounded by woods. Continental riflemen get the better of the opening encounter, but arriving elements of Fraser's column push Morgan's men back in turn. The front line develops across the open ground, and both armies begin trading deadly volleys. The British attempt to turn to the bayonet and surge across the field into enemy lines, but accurate fire leads to horrific casualties and the attacks stall. Continental counterattacks are met in the same way as the battle descends into a desperate slugging match. Generals on both sides, including Burgoyne and Arnold, are in the thick of the fighting and personally lead charges into enemy lines, keeping morale high on both sides. By 3 p.m, the British centre is being hard-pressed by New Hampshire and Connecticut troops, but well-coordinated counterattacks with bayonets and artillery check American progress. British cannon on the left are repeatedly captured and then recaptured in desperate melees. Across the front, the fighting is brutal and often at close quarters as units stumble into one another and charge again and again into each other's positions along the woodline. Arnold becomes concerned about a breakthrough as the British push forward on his right. But Gates refuses to commit more regiments, forcing Arnold in desperation to collect any man available in camp, including men on guard duty, and hurl them at the British to once again stabilise the line. Thick musket smoke covers the battlefield, and the sounds of wounded and dying men are only covered by the constant cannon and volley fire. At 5 p.m, the British left column under General Riedesel, comprising mostly of German units, has finally received orders to aid in the centre and arrives just as the sun begins to set on Freeman's Farm. They advance onto the field just in time to see the British centre barely fight off another American assault. With the battle hanging in the balance, the Germans immediately attack the exposed continental flanks. Supported by exhausted British troops who advance with renewed confidence, they finally force the Americans from the field. In the fading light, no pursuit is possible, and both sides begin to lick their wounds. The Continentals had lost the field, and almost 500 dead, wounded, and captured. The British losses were higher, with official figures at almost 600. Burgoyne had won a Pyrrhic victory, but his strategic situation had worsened. He was no closer to Albany, 30 miles away, and he now had hundreds of wounded to care for. Burgoyne's personal bravery was unquestionable during the fighting, but his insistence to be with his men meant that he was unable to step back and assess the battlefield. Had he better coordinated the three columns, he could have brought concentrated power to bear and won a convincing victory. The same is true for Arnold, who was adamant after the battle that had Gates listened to his pleas for reinforcements, the Continentals would have destroyed the advancing British columns one by one. It seemed that both sides' inability to concentrate their forces had led to bloody stalemate at Freeman's Farm. In the following days, Burgoyne starts to dig in and build fortifications of his own. On the 21st of September, he receives vital news. General Clinton in New York had been reading reports from the north with growing concern and now offers Burgoyne a lifeline. To divert Continental troops south, on October 3rd, Clinton and 3,000 men move up the Hudson River. A string of forts are quickly captured, and Clinton's force soon comes within 70 miles of Saratoga. Burgoyne sits tight and makes no further attacks while he waits for news of Clinton's arrival. But just as a second expedition is preparing to move on Albany, General Howe orders Clinton to instead send his army to Philadelphia. Clinton is furious at the decision, but he can do nothing, and Burgoyne will have to fight his way out of Saratoga alone. In the Continental camp, General Gates and Arnold's relationship has now collapsed. Despite Arnold leading the army at Freeman's Farm, Gates fails to mention him in dispatches and then removes many of the troops under his command. The insults are too much for the fiery Arnold, and he considers leaving the army. After a petition is signed by almost the entire army's colonels and generals requesting that he stays, Arnold relents. But aside from the senior rivalries, the Continental Army is in good condition, and fresh militia arrive in the camp each day, bringing the total to over 12,000 men. Across the field, Burgoyne's position is quickly becoming desperate. Heavy rain and cold temperatures are damaging morale and leading to daily desertions. And without his Indian allies, he has little to no intelligence of his enemy, who now controls the no man's land and the surrounding territory. To reach Albany, he must defeat or outmaneuver Gates's army before his supplies run out, giving him weeks. But even in Albany, he would still face a bitter winter deep in enemy territory. A retreat to Ticonderoga remains possible, but his slow-moving army would be vulnerable to attack along the way. By early October, Burgoyne must make a decision. He orders a reconnaissance in force for October 7th as one last attempt to test the American flank for weaknesses and forage for much-needed food. If a weakness is found, the entire army will attack the following day. If not, the army will finally retreat north and to the safety of Canada. At 10 a.m. on the 7th, Burgoyne leads his 1,700-strong reconnaissance force towards the American lines. When news reaches Gates of the British movements, he dispatches Arnold to investigate, their relationship finally being restored in the previous days. Morgan's riflemen are ordered against the British right, and New Hampshire regiments are sent against the left. As the Americans begin to form up, British cannon open fire, but to little effect in the thick woods. The Second Battle of Saratoga has begun. On the British left, the Continentals attack quickly and violently. Artillery batteries change hands several times as British grenadiers struggle to hold on against New Hampshire Continentals in furious fighting. By 3 p.m, the British are forced to give way, and an organised retreat quickly turns into a rout on the flank. German regiments in the rear get caught up in the collapse, abandoning artillery crews under Captain Pausch, who heroically under fire redeploys his guns to the rear. The Continentals soon set about rolling up the British line, just as the attack on the right begins. Morgan's riflemen have swung around behind the British and now attack them from multiple directions. The effect is devastating, and the entire British line soon begins to disintegrate. Burgoyne can do nothing to slow the attack, and with his horse hit and bullet holes in his clothing, he orders a retreat back to the defences. General Gates, lightly happy with how the battle is going, sends Arnold a steady stream of reinforcements being requested to maintain momentum and carry on the assault. At 4 p.m, troops from Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut arrive alongside Arnold. They now significantly outnumber the British, whose cohesion has completely crumbled. British General Fraser makes a brave stand with his 24th Regiment, acting as a rearguard and preventing a number of neighbouring units from being overrun. But they take heavy casualties, including the popular and talented General Fraser, who is shot dead from his horse. British troops scramble into their redouts, but the Continentals and militias are fast on their heels, and outer works are quickly captured. Arnold leads further attacks, but these are beaten back with heavy casualties. Attention is then switched to a second redoubt further north, now manned by just 200 British troops. Arnold moves forward once again, recklessly riding between positions, and attacks with 2,000 men from multiple directions. Arnold is the first to storm the parapets, but he is hit in the leg during the fighting. Perhaps wanting to die a hero, he tells surrounding comrades that he wished the bullet had gone through his heart instead. Despite the wound,
If it did, there would be streets named after him. Probably cities named Arnold. I don't remember if it was the Battle of Saratoga or not. I don't think it was. There was a great story about Arnold. He was in reserve, and some British and colonials, they're fighting. The colonials take off. They're in retreat. There might have been a hill or something. The British got to this hill. I think the colonials got off the hill. Excuse me. And Arnold was on a horse, and he comes up and he stops them. And he's being shot at, and he stops them while he's on his horse, and he's like, "Come on, we're taking the fight to him." And they're like, "Are you crazy?" "No." And he goes, "Follow me, men," something like that. I read it in this Benedict Arnold book. He's, "Follow me, men." He starts charging towards them. They level their muskets at him, and he raises up on his horse, opens his hands, and screams at these people as he's charging towards them. And he might have said, like, "I am death and I'm coming for you." I don't remember, but he screams something at these British soldiers who have rounds in their muskets ready to fire. And they see him and they think, that man's crazy. And his scream, his war cry, as they called it, scared them. It's one man on a horse, like 15 British soldiers. Scared the hell out of them. Some of them dropped their muskets so they could run faster to get away from him. He turned the tide of that hill and ends up helping to win that battle. The future American soldiers, the colonists that were there, said his war cry scared them so much so that they knew the British had to be scared, because it was, to them, it was how the British reacted was how they would have reacted had they heard that war cry coming from the natives or the Indians in the woods. Like, you heard that and you instantly thought, uh-oh, and you just ran. You didn't know how many there were, but it was scary. It was, you could even relate it later to the Civil War, the rebel yell. And there were some Union people who heard that yell and thought, oh no. Because that yell indicated they're coming. And they don't care if they get killed. They don't care if they kill you. One of them's about to happen. And when you heard that war cry, you just thought, oh no. You had one chance to fire a shot and run. And it was something about like that cry, that Arnold, that scream that told the British, this man's crazy. He doesn't care if he lives. He doesn't care if he dies. Only thing he cares about is riding that horse, getting to us. And when he gets to us, their fear, he was going to rip them apart. And they ran. And that's who Arnold was. And it drives me crazy what he did. Sorry, just reflecting.
Arnold continues to direct the battle while encouraging his men on. As the Americans climb into the fortifications, the British commander is killed, and the rest of the men soon flee into the woods to save themselves. As the sun begins to set, the fighting dies down with it. The battle is over, and Burgoyne's reconnaissance has been a complete disaster. All of the newly foraged food is captured, along with large numbers of cannon and other critical supplies. The British have also suffered almost 900 losses, including a large number of senior officers. The Second Battle of Saratoga has been an unquestionable American victory, thanks in no small part to both Gates and Arnold's leadership. Burgoyne's options were now almost non-existent. In the coming days, a number of councils of war would eventually agree that capitulation is their only choice. General Gates, receiving reports that Clinton's army had been successfully moving towards Albany, is keen to end the fighting in Saratoga quickly. He agrees to surprisingly lenient terms that include allowing the British to return to Europe, provided that they do not fight again in North America. The entire British army surrenders on the 17th with full honours. Those terms would never be implemented, however, and Congress would soon revoke the agreement. In captivity, many of the surrendered British and German troops would eventually die of disease or escape to new lives in America. The Saratoga campaign would have far-reaching consequences. Burgoyne would be paroled to England the following year, where he would spend the rest of his life defending his actions, while never commanding an army again. Burgoyne would be widely blamed for the defeat, particularly for his insistence to move towards Albany, despite the many obvious signs to change course. But Lord Germain was also to blame. The failure highlighted the challenges of attempting to coordinate a war from different continents, and Lord Germain's inability to create a singular and undivided strategy for the war in 1777. The defeat, instead of ushering in the end of the conflict, as many hoped, started the emergence of a new strategy in London, one that would shift the war from the north to a new major theatre of operations in the southern colonies. There were other European consequences for the campaign as well. France had been eagerly watching events in North America since the outbreak of the conflict. French foreign ministers were not interested in recapturing old French territories, but rather in dealing a damaging blow to a chief rival and revenge for the defeats they suffered during the 7 Years' War. For the British, what they feared most from the disaster at Saratoga was not further American gains, but instead that the victory would convince France to enter the war, turning a localized rebellion into a worldwide conflict. The French had already been, in secret, supplying huge quantities of aid to the Continentals. At Saratoga alone, it is estimated that up to 90% of American arms were French supplied. Before Saratoga, further negotiations between the two had stalled, but within days of news arriving in Paris of the surrender, a Franco-American alliance was soon being drafted between Benjamin Franklin and the French foreign minister, the Count of Vergennes.
There's another funny little story. Benjamin Franklin, when he was booted out of England, when he got that dressing down by the king and the court, and he goes to France, he had some friends that he still communicated with. That he still communicated with in England, and one of them had told him, "You'll never win the war with this farmer," and that really just annoyed Franklin. And at the end of the war, spoiler alert, with a lot of help from other countries, the American colonies become the United States of America. I apologize if you didn't know. You can pretend like you don't, and we can continue. But Franklin, after, I think it was, it might have been the Yorktown. Anyways, Franklin writes his friend in England and says, the greatest military in the world just got defeated by that farmer. I don't think they ever had communications again. Franklin was an ass, but you loved it.
The alliance is finally signed in February 1778, with part of the agreement only coming into effect if Britain and France went to war, which now only seemed a matter of time. Although Saratoga had been a crushing and complete American victory, it had not been the only campaign in 1777. Further south, General Howe had begun a major campaign against both Washington and Philadelphia, where he is looking to deliver a knockout blow. Thank you for watching our series on the American.
And that's another problem. And this goes for any war. This was the Confederates in the Civil War. It's always looking for that knockout blow. If you're looking for the knockout blow, I could understand you saying looking for that knockout blow to end the war sooner. I get that. But when you're looking for that knockout blow, to me, that puts you instantly on the side of you're not looking at the war as what it's probably going to be, which is potentially a sustained war, a lot of fighting, casualties. You're looking at the how can we get this over fast? And when you're looking at that, you are not focused on what it's probably going to be. Russia and Afghanistan, America and Afghanistan, long term. You're looking at we come in, boom, 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 we win. Hey, stop. Boom, 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 we win. And we can leave, right? No. Because there's a lot more that comes down to that. And that failure to account for that and the hope of one knockout blow, you're just signaling that we're not here for the long term. We're here for the short term. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to lose. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like the Confederates were always, and the Union was too. I'm not trying to hide from that. The Union was also looking for that, the Battle of Bull Run, that knockout blow. Peace is going to be within reach instantly. But the Union realized this is going to be longer than that. And some Confederates did too. But they were always still looking for that one knockout blow that would change the people's opinion in the North. And you could go pick any war where I'm sure that there was one side looking for that quick, decisive end because they could not sustain a long-term battle. And that's the failure, especially when you're going overseas to fight. America does it too. Okay, well, we're going to end this here. This is part 2 of the 7th. No, phone, stop. Nobody's talking to you. This is part 2 of the 6th episode. I'm done with videos for the night. So I hope you enjoy. And until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.